Now that you've thought about your branding, it's time to get technical. And we're going to start very basic, but there's some very basic things you've got to be on the same page with me on so that everything else makes sense, okay? So let's talk about the internet. What is the internet? Well, you know what the internet is. You use it every day, right? But at a basic level, here's what it is. Let's take two computers in the office here. Let's say I hook up two computers over Wi-Fi and they can talk to each other, right? Well, that's called a local area network. They're networked to each other, they can communicate. The internet is just that on a larger scale. It was started by the military, and it was called something else back then. It started back in like the 1960s. And the first internet thing was when a computer at Stanford and a computer at like Berkeley, I don't know where the universities were, but they sent a message to each other. It's like, whoa, the internet's born, right? It's very basic, but all it is computers just talking to each other, whether it be over a phone line, cell tower, fiber optic, all the ways it happens today. And so, of course, I'm oversimplifying it. There's massive infrastructure that's required to be able to communicate all over the world, but that's all the internet is. It's not a big deal. It's huge, but it's not a big deal. And so with that, computers have to speak the same language. For example, let's say you've got two people that speak French. And so this one French guy has an idea that he wants to relay, okay? So he uses the language of French, or the French language, to package and deliver that idea to another individual. And if that individual doesn't speak French, they can't understand the idea because the language is the delivery mechanism. Make sense? And so computers are the same way. They have to speak the same language for data to be transferred between them. And so that's called a protocol. And the internet primarily runs off of a protocol suite called TCP/IP. And the reason you need to know about this is because we're going to deal with IP addresses. You deal with that all the time, and even now, even if you don't know it. For example, here in my office, I've got a laptop connected over Wi-Fi, and I've got a printer connected over Wi-Fi. And for these two devices to participate on the network, they have to have what's called an IP address. An IP address is a cryptic number like this, 192.168.0.1. That's an IP address, and there's obviously tons of them, right? And so my computer has an IP address, my printer has an IP address, and that's how they communicate. And so the same goes for the entire internet. All the servers, all the things on the internet have IP addresses, and that's how they talk to each other. Now, as humans, unless you're some geeky person or a math major or whatever, we don't want to remember these long, weird numbers for everything. So there's something called DNS, Domain Name Service. And DNS does this. It allows us to tie a logical, easy-to-remember name with an IP address, okay? So instead of that cryptic number for, let's say, going to a website, I can type in www.apple.com, and my computer queries the DNS servers and says, hey, where's apple.com? And when it gets to the right name server, the name server will say, DNS server and name server are the same, by the way. The name server will say, oh, I know apple.com, it's at this IP address. And so then my computer is able to send its request and talk to apple.com, which means I can then see the website, okay? And so that's how it works. WriteDirect.co, school.writedirect.co, when you go to the film school, it's DNS is saying, okay, where's WriteDirect.co? Oh, it's at this server, at this data center, at this IP address. And so that's what's happening behind the scenes for us. So the reason we need to know this as filmmakers is because we're going to be choosing domain names, a domain name based on the branding route that we take. And we're also going to be setting up a website that has an IP address and making those things all work together, okay? So something you have to know about DNS. We're all familiar with the address scheme. WriteDirect.co or WriteDirect.studio, Apple.com. The dot and then co.com, .gov, .edu, all the variations of that part of the domain name, the part that's to the right of the decimal, is called a top-level domain. TLD is another way people refer to it. And so basically you've got all these TLDs at the very top, .com, .biz, .gov, .edu, and then the next part is below them. And so you can have WriteDirect.co, WriteDirect.com, WriteDirect.biz, etc. And so it kind of spreads down like an inverted tree. That's how DNS works. So when we're choosing a name, we're not just choosing Theater 11, we're also choosing theater11.what. And so I chose .com. And .com is typically the top level domain you want to go for because that's the most common. That's what we all think about and know, okay? But sometimes it's not available. For example, when I set up the film school, writedirect.com was already taken, but it wasn't taken by another business. Someone's just sitting on it and they're holding it and trying to sell it. And they're trying to sell it for like $3 or $5 grand. And so I thought, no way, I'm not paying that, right? So I just used the .co. But you've got to think it through, because if I had gone to writedirect.com and it was another business, especially a business in the same arena that I was dealing with, then that would be confusing because people default to .com. They would go to that and they would think it's me and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't the school. It doesn't work. That would be bad for you. So let's take theater11.com. When I went to set that up, if theater11.com had been taken, I probably wouldn't have done theater11.co because Theater11 in and of itself kind of dictates either theater or filmmaking, right? And so it just would have been a confusing thing because it would probably be a theater company, plays, etc., that was using that, and then people would go to that, think it's me, and not know where I was, etc. So not to convolute it all, but when you choose your domain name, pretty soon here in just a second, you're going to have to decide on both of those. Now, another thing you need to know, you get domain names through what's called a domain registrar. So just like with our cell phones, when we go to AT&T or whoever, and we get a phone and they're licensed to give us a number to use, well, there's companies licensed to lease out these domain names for us to use, and you pay annually, not monthly. It's an annual expense. And the expense is typically, it depends on which top-level domain you choose. Like .com is typically cheaper than .co or .studio, etc. But you're going to spend $12 to maybe $25 a year, okay? And so what you do is you go to a domain registrar and you register that domain name. And that doesn't have to be the same place your website is or anything like that. And it can get confusing, and we're going to get into all this, but it can get confusing because places like GoDaddy or just other companies like that package all of these services together, email, website, domain name, as one product, and they try to sell all of this stuff. But you don't need to have everything at one spot, okay? So the domain registrar that we're going to use is called Cloudflare, cloudflare.com. And trust me, it's the best one to use, and they have really good services that are free that you're going to take advantage of later on. I'm going to show you how to do it, all right? So hopefully this is making sense. As a brief summary, you've got the internet, which is all these computers talking to each other, and they're talking via cell towers, via fiber optic lines, cable network, all of these things. But it's just all these different physical mediums that are allowing us to communicate, whether it's a phone, laptop, etc. And then with that, each of these devices has an IP address. But so that we don't have to remember these cryptic numbers, we have DNS, domain name service. And so the domain name that we want to use for marketing is related to all this. And so we get that domain name through a registrar, and it's an annual fee, okay? Hopefully this is making sense. As you do it, it's going to continue to clarify, so don't worry. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to show you how to go to cloudflare.com, open up a free account, and then search for a domain name to use. Let's do it. So here we are at a browser. You want to go to cloudflare.com and just click Start for Free. Just go ahead and fill out your information here, do the verification process. This step is free. You're not going to spend any money. This is just a free account, all right? Let's do it. Once you've created your account and you're signed in, you're going to see a screen like this. And it's basically asking you to enter the domain you want to manage at Cloudflare. So here's what's going on. You don't have to use Cloudflare as a registrar. I didn't use them as a registrar at first, but I transferred all the ownership, or rather management, of my domains to Cloudflare so I could take advantage of the things that they offer. So what do they offer? Well, they offer things like easy domain management. They allow you to store images on their site instead of your WordPress site. Cloudflare also helps with website security, which is a big deal. So they will stop various forms of attack before they even get to your website, which not only protects your site, but helps with your web server's performance. Because if it's having to fight those things off because your web server has a firewall, but if it's doing the work, it hits the performance a little bit, whereas Cloudflare is offloading some of that for you. So that's what this is asking here is, hey, put in the domain that you want to manage, and then they would tell you how to transfer management to them from your other registrar. But for us right now, we're going to register a new domain. So that's what we want to click on. And now it's asking me to verify my account because it sent me an email. So I'm going to do that. Here it is, verify email. And it's saying, hey, verify this email address by logging back in. Okay. And there we go. I'm just going to close the new tab it opened, go back to the other one, refresh. Okay, so now we can search for a domain name. So let's search for rightdirect.com. Okay, rightdirect.com is not available, right? And we talked about this, it wasn't available. So I'm going to see what that is. Let's go here. Okay, this domain is for sale for $3,200. So someone's just sitting on this name hoping to sell it. And so that's what I ran into. So this is why I chose rightdirect.co for the film school. So let me close that. Let's choose another one. Theater11.com. My independent film company. Obviously that's going to be taken, but I just want to walk you through the stuff that you're going to run into, okay? So search, it's not available. So what I would do, if this is the name that you wanted, what you need to do is see who has it and what they're doing with it. So in this case, it's obviously another film production company. So if you check this with the name that you want and it has anything to do with theater or filmmaking, you definitely don't want to just change the top level domain, which remember is the .com to something else, because that could be confusing if they're in the same industry that we're in. But if you went to the name that you want and it's just something wildly different, it's a makeup company or whatever, then yeah, you could choose a different top-level domain and go forward that way. So let me close this. If you click on supported extensions right here, here are all the different extensions that you can register. There's a lot of top-level domains, okay? And I haven't said this before, but different registrars are authorized for different TLDs. And different TLDs can only be used by certain companies or industries. For example, I can't set up a .gov. That's only for government. Some TLDs are specific to countries. You've got .edu, so you might have to provide some proof that you're an educational facility, etc. Okay? But for the most part, most of these are available to anyone, and then they have various price tags. So you can scroll through all these, or you can search to see if one exists. Like, hey, does Studio exist? Yes, it does. So then I know I could go back and say theater11.studio. Hey, that's available. $31 a year. So it's a little more money. It's on the pricier side than some of the other ones. Let's check theater11.co. $26 a year. So you get it. You could even do .tv. So Theater11 TV is available and it's $25 a year. So you've got to decide what primary domain name you want to go with and then what TLD you want to use, and just make sure you're not confusing your audience. So let me just show you how this works. I'm going to register one, kylerchannel.com. See if that's available. It is. And look, it's only $10.44 a year. It's a lot cheaper. The .com is cheaper. So I'm going to click purchase. And then I have payment options. I can prepay for a certain amount of years, but I just set them to auto renew. So it's not a big deal because I don't see any price break here by prepaying, okay? So I'm going to fill out this information and then put in my payment info, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, I've filled everything out. I'm going to choose complete purchase. And there we go. Congratulations, you have a domain name registered. So what do we want to do now? Click on Manage Domain. So it shows us automatic domain renewal is on. That's good. Now let's just click up on the Cloudflare icon in the top left. So here's your domain name, and if you had more than one domain name, they would all show up here. And if you click on the domain name, over on the right, you'll see DNS records. Click on that. So we talked about the purpose of DNS, right? It allows us to tie logical names to IP addresses, and there's other things that DNS does for us that we'll talk about as needed. But this is where you would do that. I could go over here and choose Add Record, and I could say, hey, point to this IP address. And so what would happen when I do this, if someone goes to kylerchannel.com, their computer's going to reach out to name servers and they will eventually get to a Cloudflare name server. And in fact, if we scroll down, it shows you your name servers right here. These are DNS servers that stores the information for your domain. So a computer's going to end up at one of these and they're going to say, yeah, I know kylerchannel.com, whatever your domain name is, and it's at this IP address. Things like that, okay? We're not going to enter any information in here yet because we need to still set up our web server. We're going to do that at xCloud, and that's in another lesson here on the channel. So we'll be back in here though when we need to set up things like email and a variety of other things to get your online marketing going the way it should be. See you in another lesson on the channel very soon.